Not much, but a little bit.
Are we ready? All right, Director. Could you introduce everyone that's with you, please?
If you're ready to begin.
We're ready. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So to my left, everybody knows Julie Zolgadar, our budget manager. To my right is Travis Hamlin. He is an analyst in the budget shop that works for Julie and is the analyst for my office for OBM. Behind me, we have Jacinta Wilson, who's our fiscal officer. Sandy Robinson, you all know, the purchasing agent. And Tim Weir is our fleet manager. I thought Alderman Redpath might have some fleet questions tonight, so Tim's here to help answer some of those. And with that, we will, I think that's everybody that came. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. They're hidden in the back. Dallas Whitford and Radistina Dimitrova are back in the corner there. Radistina works with Travis and Julie, and, of course, Dallas, you know, is our revenue manager. He needs no introduction. Okay, so if we're going to do this quickly, these are our divisions: accounting, the admin division, budget division, central managed services, which is purchasing, payroll, and fleet services. One thing you'll notice is not there, we talked about it last week, is facilities management. That is being moved over to Public Works in anticipation of a consolidation with the parking division over there so that we can continue to streamline city services and reduce costs. Workforce in OBM. We have 10% of our workforce is non-Caucasian. We have 37% females, 63% males, and 90% Caucasian. Vacancies. Fleet Technician 1 is in the process of being filled with an apprentice, and I'm going to talk about that because that's in our accomplishment section. Here are a couple slides ahead. The Account Tech 1 is in the process of being filled. In fact, I don't know if Director Trueson's still here or not, that offer may have already gone out for that individual in anticipation of the AP consolidation. And then the Police Department Fiscal Officer we've talked about already. If we have any questions, we can certainly talk about that at the end. You look at our what we call our base core group, which is the accounting, budgeting, payroll, basically the non-facilities and non-fleet. Back in 11, we had 25 individuals in that group, and this year, if you were to exclude the new fiscal officers and the 2 account clerks from CWLP, we would be down to just 19. So we continue to try and do more with less, save money where we can. Fleet, if you look at the top gold bars, you'll see that when we started the consolidation, we had 32. We've asked for 28 in the upcoming budget, but with the upcoming closure of the body shop, we will drop another 4 so that we will end up with 24 individuals, which we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And, of course, facilities management, I already mentioned, is going from 10 to 0 because they're transferring over to a different department. Some of our workforce changes, I've already touched on these. Facilities management, fleet maintenance, we eliminated, we've done a pretty good job, we think, of getting more productive and with our training and our tools and all of that. So we've eliminated 2 fleet technician positions, saving $123,000 a year. We also are closing the body shop, which has been planned since the consolidation. This year, we're looking at saving somewhere in the neighborhood of $250K. Annually, we're looking at over $500,000 in savings from doing that. The finance side we talked about already. The fiscal officers transitioning over to OBM from the other departments that have dedicated fiscal officers, and the 2 account clerks from CWLP. And we also eliminated an existing OBM position in Accountant 1, saving $50,000 annually. Accomplishments, we replaced the roof on MCE, which should make it to the point where we don't have to talk about that for over 30 years. The 8th and Capitol ramp, we've started a program to replace lights as they go out with new energy-efficient LED lighting that's 64% more, or uses 64% less energy than the existing lights. Also produces a better light. In accounting, we once again received the Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting. We expect that for FY17 as well. This is, I think, will be of interest. I talked with the accountants recently, and we are expecting, based on the current market trends, to repay all of the Oak Ridge corpus that was being used for operations years ago, to the point where we expect at some point in the upcoming fiscal year to begin utilizing some of the interest and dividends gains for operations, which I know Director Lellis will be happy to hear, and I figure you all will as well. In budget, we had a couple of our analysts to complete a continuing education program in public finance. We have been asked, Julie and myself have participated in several teaching opportunities and seminars with other organizations around the state, including IGFOA and IML, and the municipal clerks and treasurers. I spoke at a treasurer's thing. Fleet, we reduced headcount, talked about that, negotiated a new contract allowing for apprentice hires, amongst other things. Now, this is significant because what it does is, one of the things we found is when we bring people in, they tend to have a certain niche. They can work on light trucks, or they can work on the heavy-duty stuff, or maybe heavy-duty equipment like backhoes and that. It's been very difficult to find somebody who's well-rounded, who can work on all of the myriad of different things that we have here in the city. So one of the ideas that we approached the contractual negotiations is, could we bring in an apprentice, somebody who would work with our seasoned veterans, who could work with them to learn all the different pieces of equipment. And the nice thing about it is, whereas our starting wage now for a regular technician is $23, the starting wage for this individual, I believe, is $15. So it's a way to get somebody in the door, to train them, build them up, and do it at a lower cost for the taxpayers of Springfield. So we're very excited about that, and that's the vacancy I was talking about earlier. We are looking to try and hire an apprentice for that slot. We also negotiated 10-hour shifts for our night shift, and the nice thing about that is it gives us a much more coverage during the week. We used to have a Sunday night shift, which of course isn't really necessarily during the work week for our public works and other staffs. So we've gone to 10-hour shifts on the evenings, Monday through Thursday, which provides more hours. And we've talked to our technicians, and Tim can back me up on this because we spoke about it today. The technicians are actually finding that they're even more productive. They have more time during the evening to get things done and complete jobs, rather than start them and then have to come back and finish them the next night. So that so far is working out pretty well. We also continued our alternative fuel program expansion, putting on 6 more police vehicles. That brings us up to over 80 city vehicles on propane auto gas right now. And propane, I think, is about half the price of regular gasoline currently because it's the winter, but certainly there's a bigger differential in the summertime. Purchasing, expanding the archives that we have online, allowing the public to go in and look at all of our bid and RFP results and documentation, just to basically increase our purchasing transparency. I know that's very important to the mayor. Our overall budget, as most of you who are familiar with it know, corporate's actually a smaller portion of ours, especially when you look at just base operation corporate. Self-insurance is the biggest piece at $40 million, and then we got Fund 95 at $23 million, and you can see the other pieces there. I don't need to go over them. Here's the budget by cost center. I'll just point out a couple of things. The $6.8 million reduction in contractual services represents the finishing or falling off of the final year of the 3-year infrastructure program. The rest of that money was spent in this current fiscal year, and therefore there's nothing left out of the GO bond issuances to spend in future years. The equipment of $1.4 million, that's the equipment allocation for public works that you all gave this year. So you see that drop off at $1.4 million as well. Overall, the budget's down $9.5 million, or 10.2% in OBM this year versus in FY19 versus FY18. Corporate operations, see that this is our base operations of the accounting, payroll, budgeting, admin, and payroll. About $2 million this year. You can see that going up to 2.8, and that variance has everything to do with the bringing on of 2 account clerks from the utility and 6 fiscal officers from other departments. We also have a bit of an increase there for technology upgrades that we are told by ISD are necessary, new computers and Microsoft Office upgrades for security purposes. Everything else is either down or flat for the most part, it looks like, other than that small little piece in equipment. So overall, if you exclude the clerks and the fiscal officers we're getting, our request in this area actually would have been down almost 2%. Self-insurance, there's some questions on that. Typically, health is the biggest piece. It's $31.5 million. But as you'll see on the next, self-insurance, we've had a pretty good year, and as a result, we're not asking for increases in any of those areas except for the sick payout, because That's one of those things we analyze annually. And what we've found is that we needed to increase the fringe in the non-police and fire departments, because we continue, while we've adjusted those over the last few years, we hadn't adjusted the other one, and we're finding that the money coming in from those non-police and fire departments isn't keeping up with what's going out. So we had to adjust that slightly up from 0.72% to 1%, correct? But overall, pretty much flat in self-insurance, which is a good thing. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about fleet here. I got a few slides, and then we'll finish up. So the fleet maintenance budget request for FY19 is $4.9 million, $347,000 less than the current year, or 6.54% decline. A lot of that has to do with the fact that we talked about the personnel changes. We've eliminated positions, and we'll be closing the body shop in November at the very latest, possibly before, depending on when the personnel decide to retire. We also, after body shop, as I mentioned, will have 24 individuals in fleet services when it's all said and done by the end of the year. So our budget for fleet maintenance, as you can see through the years, we've been trying to refine what we do. We've been trying to improve our productivity and do our job at a much lower cost. So each and every year since the consolidation, we've asked for less appropriations, starting with $5.7 million in the very first full year in 2016, all the way down to under $5 million in the coming year. So we're talking about, in that time frame, a decline of $714,000, or a 12.6% decline in our appropriations request. Also, those of you that were here at the initial outset of the consolidation will remember that we had to borrow in order to get seed money for the fleet operation in that first year, and we ended up borrowing about $1.5 million, and we've whittled that away year after year. We'd originally thought it was going to be 5 or 6 years, and it looks like we might do it a little bit sooner than that, but it's certainly at least on track. We're looking at it projected end of 2019 being somewhere around just $250,000, so I've come a long way in a few short years on paying that back. So let's talk about pre-consolidation, because this always seems to come up, and I wanted to highlight this. When we did the consolidation, I knew back then, we all knew back then, that there would continually, probably annually, be the question, how much are we saving on the fleet consolidation? So one of the things that we memorialized way back then in 2012, 2013, was the budgets for the unconsolidated fleet operations, each one of them, fire, police, public works, and the utility. And we have those. We memorialize them. So you can see there, the head count was 50 individuals in the unconsolidated fleet operation at that time. The budgets combined were $6.6 million. And applying CPI over the last, since that time, you come up with, in today's dollars, $7.2 million, or a little over $7.2 million for the unconsolidated fleet operations, had they remained as they were back in FY 2012. So we already talked about what it is now. The overall, we're looking at $2.25 million less for the consolidated operation versus the unconsolidated operation in today's dollars, which is, we had talked about from the beginning, we thought that we'd eventually get to over $2 million, and we're happy to say that we indeed have achieved that from a budgetary basis here. And if you look at each department, every single department, this is the chargeback for them this year. This is what they're being charged for fleet operations. Every department is less than the unconsolidated operation for each. And that's significant because one of the things I know we talked about with fire a week or so ago was that they, and I don't know where the information came from, the assertion was that they're paying more. And I don't know if that's because in the line folks were looking at, they forgot that fuel was in there as well, which isn't covered in fleet maintenance. It was a $900 and some thousand dollar 1800 or automotive line. Well, fuel's a couple $100,000 of that, or close to it. It's a lot of gas to run those fire trucks. So when you look at this, it's not 200,000 less, or to keep it unconsolidated, it's actually $141,000 more in their unconsolidated operation. And it's not hard to really come to that conclusion. I mean, the most expensive mechanic we had in the city was in the fire department, who was paid over $100,000, $108,000, I believe it was, or about $52 an hour. When he retired, the contract that we negotiated when we set up the consolidation and reset the wages, that particular slot went from paying $52 an hour to paying $22 an hour. And that's been a constant theme. As we've rotated out the individuals who were inherited and who have retired, we've replaced them with staff that are much more cost-effective for the city and for the taxpayers. So hence, we are saving a lot of money, and to the tune of about $2.2 million. And one thing else I wanted to mention, there was concern about whether it was better or not better. We talked to a couple of the fire mechanics, one that's there now, even today, and, you know, the first time he came in and he put a fire truck on the lifts that we had bought for the consolidated operation, he was in hog heaven. He had never in his career walked under a fire truck before. But because we've given them the tools that they need, they can do their job much more quickly, so they can get things in and out. We also have a 10-ton overhead crane on both sides of the garage that helps them. There was a job when they've got to take a tank out of the fire truck. It used to take them, I think, a couple of weeks to do it by hand. Well, now they can do it in 4 days. So we really are trying to give them the training and the tools to have a much more productive workforce. And I think that is illustrated in the fact that we're able to continue to do our job with fewer and fewer technicians and mechanics. Again, we had 50 people in the unconsolidated operation. By the end of this year, we're going to have 24, less than half. And we're pretty proud of that fact. So let's talk about some of the, you know, there's always people out there. There's always a bad situation. We always have something comes along, and unfortunately, sometimes people tend to gravitate towards one thing out of thousands to try and reflect that fleet's not doing a good job, or it's not very productive, or stuff sits for days. Now, luckily for us, one of the things that we invested in back then was a rather expensive but very useful software program called AssetWorks that tracks everything we do, every hour of time of our technicians, the asset, everything, the parts that go on it, it's all there. So we're able to turn to that for objective data, and this is what we've done here. So we had, in 2017, about 5,300 work orders. Of that, the average downtime was 3.2 days for a piece of equipment. That's downtime in working hours for our staff, because, again, we do a lot of stuff overnight. But when they're there, or supposed to be there, it's only 3.2 days. 1 hour or less, nearly 31% of our work orders were completed in 1 hour or less. 1 day or less, 65% almost. In 2 days or less, almost 75%. There are some situations where we have parts that we can't get, or there's something we can't get to because there's something else that is more pressing. Perhaps, say, a backhoe breaks down in the wintertime and we've got to work on a snowplow or dump truck. Those things do happen. And so sometimes things do get pushed back. But by and large, our staff is pretty productive, and they try and move things as quickly as they can, and the data is there to support that fact. Now, from a parts standpoint, we've heard that you can't get parts from Napa and all of that. That's not true. Almost 85% of parts are available when you walk up to the counter. That is much, much more than they were when the fleet was unconsolidated. And I wish Mike Palazzola was here, because he worked in an unconsolidated operation, and he knew the other ones. And he was always very adamant that that was one of the reasons why we've gotten more productive, is because parts are more readily available now today than they were back then. 97, almost 98% of parts are available within 24 hours. Almost 99% within 48 hours. So there's 1.3% of parts that are available outside of 48 hours. There certainly are outliers. In any statistical analysis, there's always outliers. And in this case, a lot of it has to do with those reasons we've listed there. You have OEM specialty parts that either need to be manufactured on demand, or they're back ordered, or they have to come from overseas, or there's premium shipping costs to keep in mind. You decide, okay, well, what's the cost benefit of spending thousands of dollars to have something shipped overnight or over 2 days versus, a week or two. And I'll give you an example. We had a Komatsu backhoe that was down for, Tim, how long was that down for, 6 months? Over 6 months. The reason it was down for over 6 months is because we couldn't get the engine. It had to be manufactured in Japan. It took a long time to get in line to get the engine manufactured, and then had to be shipped on a slow boat from Japan to get over. And then, of course, once it was here, it had to be shipped across the country. So it was down for over 6 months. Those things do happen, but what we do is we try and learn from that. And that's why one of the initiatives we've really been pushing, and it's really come to fruition this year, is anytime a department now has an equipment or a vehicle purchase request, it has to go through fleet. And it has to be reviewed by the fleet operation, because one of the things we're really pushing for is standardization. Standardization will help us get even more productive, because then individuals will be working on the same equipment, whether it's Fords or it's John Deere's or whatever. We have so many trucks that are Chevys and Fords and Dodges. We need to get away from that. And the more we standardize, the better we're going to be, the more parts we're going to have on hand. So we are working toward that. We are learning from the kind of issues that we saw come up with the Komatsu. And I don't believe we're buying Komatsus anymore, are we? Yeah, so we are not buying Komatsus anymore. We've learned from that. Last slide, our goals for 2019. We want to successfully integrate the fiscal officers from the other departments and start cross-training them on various departments. And the hope there is to eventually reduce the number of fiscal officers we have and, again, save costs. We want to continue to monitor and possibly advocate for something, legislative changes related to e-commerce. One of the biggest reasons we're all in the situation we're in today is because e-commerce, because it's really depleting our sales taxes. You've seen the numbers. I don't need to dwell on it. So we need to continue to monitor that and try and work towards the solution regarding e-commerce. We are looking at potentially transferring to a new audit firm. We have RFPs that are currently being evaluated as we speak. And we want to continue to explore other shared services opportunities. We have some ideas we're talking about internally. We want to see if that makes sense, and hopefully they do, and we can continue to transition into more shared services, more unified city, and therefore reduce costs through that consolidation. Fleet, we want to successfully close the Fleet Body Shop, which has been planned for many, many years. We want to cross-train our staff, as we talked about earlier. We want to we may potentially transition into a new parts management operation that's currently being evaluated. And I'll talk about that for a quick second. So we put the RFP out, and when it came in, I wanted to make sure that it was clear and obvious that we had, that the fix wasn't in for Napa. I'll just say it bluntly. It's not. So I assembled a team of individuals who had absolutely nothing to do with the original implementation of Napa. In fact, one of them was Tim, who wasn't even here, and has obviously expertise regarding the fleet operation. And Tim was with me when we went out and toured the city of Tampa and their parts operation, which is one of the other companies that submitted a bid. We had Matt Garani from Public Works, who had nothing to do with fleet and has nothing to do with fleet. Certainly had nothing to do with the implementation of Napa. And then the other team member is Dawn, who's the night shift assistant fleet manager, who was not even here when the decision to go with Napa was made. So those individuals have been evaluating. I do not know where they are in the process. Tim can answer that question because I've not asked about it. I've told him I did not want to be involved at all, and I told him to work directly with Sandy Robinson to make that evaluation and make that decision. And so when they bring it to me, I'll be bringing it to you. And then in facilities management, we talked about it. We want to transition them over to Public Works smoothly and work on getting them consolidated with the parking division so we can reduce staff and save money. And that's it.
Any questions? Alderman McMenamin and Hanauer.
Bill, thanks for your report. Bill, as you pointed out, we're eliminating 4 positions for body work of vehicles.
5 total.
5 total?
5 total. 1 retired
okay, that's
a month
good.
ago.
That's a good answer. Just the answer is yes. Okay, 5. And then what budget line shows the contractual services then that will need to used to do the body work that previously our employees did, but now will be done by outside
That's going
garages?
to, it's going to be 180, which one? I think? 1801. And you'll see that we increased it. It was 100,000, I believe, and I think we increased it 50. Is that correct?
So that's a best estimate. We don't know for sure how much work we will give out to garages,
not.
but we're estimating $100,000 of
Well,
body work.
150.
Well, it was 52. Excuse me. Our 2018 budget request was,
What is it? Oh, it's 100 now? Yeah, budget was 100, now it's 150, yes.
It's in the 1800s, all in the 1800 series within.
1801 in the fleet area.
so what I'm looking at is our budget, your budget request last year was 100,000 for that line item,
Correct,
and this year it's 150,000.
correct,
So it's going up 50,000.
correct. And that's to compensate for the fact that we're closing the body shop.
Okay, we'll see how it goes. Good luck on that. I mean, it could be a major cost saver.
That is what we think will happen. And just to provide a little context, you know, like I told you, we have our asset work system that has, well, this is very germane. The productivity of our body shop folks is roughly 40%, which means 40% of their time they're working on something. Whereas with our fleet technicians, it's about 85 to 90%. It means that we don't have enough work to support that operation. That's why we're closing it.
Alderman Hanauer and then Alderman Donnelly.
Thank you. Under, Bill, on moving cost on that, it's in Fund 95,
Is it the 253,000?
Yeah, roughly.
That's City Hall capital projects. Like if we need a new chiller, or when we needed the new doors down in this building, those types of projects. When the masonry fell off the MCE building and we had to do emergency repairs, that's where it comes from.
Why
Move
is
is
it under
probably
moving?
not,
Why
what's
is it
that?
under moving cost?
It's, Julie, it was before, it was pre-me.
We started a long time ago when we acquired the former Sangamon County building.
Okay.
And we called it, it's where we put the expenses to renovate and to move offices.
We could probably use a better description, but that's what it's been for a long time. But
Okay. Under, under infrastructure on 1204, last year you used 9.5 million. This year you've asked for 12.5, which is less than what you budgeted for last year. What is that line for?
that is the maintenance, the overlay, the sidewalk programs, the infrastructure maintenance for Public Works. One of the reasons we only used 9.5 this year is because we still had about $6 million worth of the GO money left.
Okay.
So that was spent down. There is no longer any of that, and therefore we went with the 12.5. And the 12.5 is right in line with the long-term infrastructure maintenance plan that we have, spending somewhere in that $12 to $13 million a range for the next 15 years.
And then under fleet, there's 30 grand for a backup generator. Is that to repair one, or you already have one there, or you're wanting to put one in?
It's not to repair one. We actually had one put in place this year, and I don't know if that note just is, let me see that. I'm guessing the note hasn't been updated because that was done this year.
Yeah.
What line is that, Alderman?
1504 under fleet.
Let's see. Yeah. Okay, so in the updated notes, which you must have got the old version, it says these are for...
This is from my old version.
Okay, yeah, these are for some lifts that they want to buy, which I kind of talked about earlier, and then they're hoping to get an industrial drill press.
All right. And then a question regarding, and I probably should have had the EDP guy. When we buy, for purchasing, Sandy, when we buy computers, do we buy off the state project, the state contract? Do we buy in bulk, or do we go out and buy from wherever, one at a time?
ISD is in charge of handling all of those requests now. It's all centralized through their area, and so what we're trying to do is more and more of the bulk purchases. I believe right now they're processing about an 86 computer type of purchase and that type of thing, so we're moving in that direction. It used to be a lot of smaller groups of purchases, which obviously doesn't allow us to take full advantage, but we use state contract and everything else that we can to try and keep the cost down as best as possible.
Okay, and then just real quick, question on the credit card stuff. Credit cards worry me because, as we've seen in the paper and other municipalities, they have a tendency to get people in trouble. I mean, I'm looking at December's bill, and the balance was, we spent $128,831 in December. And unfortunately, some of these are to Amazon Marketplace, things like that, which, as you know, we're trying to stop that. But it's here, and it's all about perception.
Right.
And my concern is, you know, I understand the need for some of them, but I just really am concerned. We're spending $120,000 a month on credit card bills.
And
That needs to be addressed. I'm sorry, that's
what you need
crazy.
to understand about the Pro Cards, Alderman, is that every purchase, literally every line item, is tied directly back to a budget line, and so there's no additional purchasing that's taking place. It's just the methodology for how those transactions are being handled. So there's not any sort of rogue spending taking place. It's all tied back on a daily basis back to those budget lines that you all are going through right now.
But, okay, a good example, and I mean, are we looking at trying to get some sort of, like, there's a lot of Red Wing boots, and I know that the unions, we are required to buy boots for, and I'm fine with that, but wouldn't it make sense for us maybe to try to go out for bid and try to get a lower price and do a bulk type deal? I mean, I don't know. I'm just looking at ways to save money, and, you know, it scares me. And I wanted to ask, I know you guys are watching it, but all it takes is one bad egg, and
Right.
I
I do want to mention that every single purchase is scrutinized, every single one, and every report is signed off by supervisors and directors on a monthly basis. So in theory, yes, what you say could happen, but I assure you that there is a very stringent review process in place for credit card purchases.
We can take
And
a
I
look
agree
at
with
the
you
group-
100%
We can
on
take a
the-
look at that.
Yeah.
I agree with you 100% on the Amazon thing. I had to put a stop to it in my own department and have encouraged others to do the same.
thank you.
Alderman Donovan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, thanks for looking into that Amazon thing. I mean, that's obviously a
Right.
significant
And we don't pay
portion.
sales tax, but still, it's a perception issue.
Exactly.
I just have a few questions. Some are more budget global questions, but as I was reading through this material for this evening, some of these things came up, Director, so I hope you don't mind me asking.
Sure.
How much fund balance, and ballpark is fine, but how much fund balance does this budget anticipate using?
Well, as proposed, $1.4 million.
Okay. And
But as we've talked about, I mean, that could change given the issues with the implementation of the revenue that the mayor is seeking.
what would that take us down to on a percentage basis?
Well, each percent's about 1.2 million. So if we had to go up, depending on, let's say it's July, you're talking about, what, 1.5%, give or take?
Right, but what do we anticipate our fund balance being when we?
We anticipate ending this year at 4.2 million or 11.9%,
11.9, so it will go down an additional 1.5%?
roughly 1.5%.
So it's getting in that very extremely low level.
It's getting, well, yeah, I mean, the original proposal takes it down a little bit further, to what, 11, do you have that sheet? sheet. Do you have that? Takes it down a little bit, probably a percent, let's say maybe 11 to 10, a little under 10 maybe, or a little under 11, and then it'd be another 1.5% on that. So you're getting in that probably 9 to 10% range.
And the budget as originally presented anticipated 2 new tax increases, which generated funds for a complete fiscal year, and you were kind enough to get me I had asked, since it looks like it's not going to be possible to have those 2 taxes be, if they do pass, be in effect the entire fiscal year, we'd essentially be losing a quarter, which is about another $1.8 million.
If it goes all the way until July 1st, roughly 1.8 million, yes.
So the budget right now, we're already 1.8 million more in the hole without any cuts or any changes.
If the assumption is that it would be July 1st, you are correct.
Well, that's what the law says, so that's not an
Right.
assumption, it's a fact.
Well, the mayor had planned to go work with the legislators to try and get an exception on that. So, I mean, that's how the budget was proposed. That's what it was predicated on. We were told that it could be done, and therefore that's what the proposal was. Now, clearly, we're too late now to go March 1st. There's no doubt about that. But if there's resolution sooner rather than later, that doesn't mean the mayor can't go to the IML or to his legislative friends and ask for early implementation, say May or June. Each month is a little over, about 430,000, give or take, something like that.
Right, well, let's back up. We're tasked with passing the budget by the end of February, so we got to go with finite numbers and finite answers. So without any other changes at all, we're right now, because the revenue numbers are not accurate, and we have to find another 1.8 just to be where we were when the budget was presented. Is that correct?
That is correct, assuming that, yes.
Okay. Do we have any debt expiring?
We have a little bit of debt expiring. We've got some debt expiring, and I was going to talk about Fund 94. We do have some debt expiring in Fund 94. Last payment is this year, so we still have one more payment of $400,000, and then that expires. Other than that, I don't. No other. Just that.
That was a hope for next year, so anyway.
Yeah, and you're right. We because of that, we are trying to formulate a plan to do some more borrowing for equipment. Unfortunately, we won't be able to go out and buy a whole bunch of fire trucks or something, but at least maybe we can do something.
And then just a couple more questions. Thanks for bearing with me.
Sure, no problem.
I noticed within the budget, and this is probably, I try to stay at the 10,000-foot level. This is probably delving down too far, but I want to ask now, or forget to ask. In the budget, our Office, Microsoft Office upgrades citywide.
Yes.
And are we purchasing the software, or are we doing the Office 365 licensing agreement? And the reason I ask is just from personal and in our own place where I work, the subscription service, I believe, is cheaper on a month-by-month basis, and I couldn't figure out what we were doing, so I thought
I believe, and that's a question for ISD, but I believe that John had mentioned the word licenses when he talked to me about it. The numbers that are in here, ISD, John specifically, came to me and said, look, we really need to upgrade computers that are really old and really old Microsoft Office subscriptions to newer ones. Can we put this much money in the budget? And that's what you see. He's
follow up with me. I just if you could reach out to John, or if I
sure.
need to, that's
I will have
that's
him.
fine as well.
I will have him reach out to you and Tim.
And then just a couple other things. Alderman McMinimum asked last week, I believe, how many vacancies were in the corporate fund, and the answer, at least what was talked about, were 22 vacancies. And then I asked for some follow-up information on basically trying to get down to the actual dollar amounts that would be associated with those, and the number was less. And I'm not sure if that's a question for you or Mr. Kuzin, but I'd like just to get a handle. Is it 22? Is it less than that? What is it?
Total corporate fund vacancies, if you include police and fire, probably is in that 22 range. But if you exclude that, I think it's much less. Is Director Kuzin still here?
Well, anyway, I'll send you what I got, and if we could work together on getting the accurate numbers, I'd appreciate that.
Sure.
And then my final question is really deals with, it's a follow-up to a question that we talked about nearly 2 weeks ago. And as you know, better than anybody maybe, we've been presented with an $11.5 million budget deficit. The budget was presented filling some of that, and I had asked the question and got a couple different answers a couple weeks ago on how many, we're in a budget crisis mode, how many collective bargaining units are impacted by the corporate fund, and the answer was 10. and I'd ask how many collective bargaining units have we sat down with and talked about ideas, ways to save money. And the reason I ask is through experience, back in, a few years ago, we had to sit down. We actually sat down with collective bargaining units. They came up with ideas. They made suggestions that were kind of outside the box even at times. And we found ways to save money. And that is, as you both well know, with Government Financial Officers Association, that is something that would be suggested as a best practice. How many have we sat down with now that's been 2 weeks later?
We have sat down with one and brought it up when we were at the negotiating table, and the response was not very favorable. I can't get into details.
No, that's
so one of the things that we're looking at doing, or one of the concerns we have, is a big difference between what occurred back in the days you're talking about and what we're facing now is a temporary versus a permanent or structural deficit. So what we're looking at, would have to look at, is more permanent cuts, permanent changes, which are the things that we have been addressing in each and every contract that we've done through wage resets and all of that. So yes, we want to go out and we want to look at potential options, and we tested the waters, and I specifically even mentioned you and the comments that you had made when we were at the negotiating table with one of our collective bargaining units, and the response was not positive.
Well, and I'm not suggesting anything specific. I'm suggesting more of a, hey, we have this crisis. It's no secret. This has been very public. Do you have any ideas, any things that we should look at? Because it's a different perspective. It's not a management perspective. It's the people in the trenches doing the actual work. And I would just, again, suggest sooner than later. We've already lost a couple more weeks.
We've had those discussions.
Well, you had one discussion with one.
No, I mean internally had discussions on how best to approach that.
Okay. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Over red path.
Bill, the proposed 0.25% sales tax the mayor's proposing, what's your calculation on what that's going to generate?
The sales tax?
Yes.
The mayor's proposing a 0.25% sales tax increase, which would be about $4.3 million is the estimate.
So,
And the telecom tax would be about $1.2 million.
So how did you come to that conclusion? Alderman McMinimum hit it on the head the other night when he said, kind of sent up a red flag when he said that we're proposing taxes that are two taxing areas that are declining because of the e-commerce problems that we're having with online sales and stuff. How do you know that it's going to end up being 4.3 because we don't know what online sales are going to do?
Well, that's the current estimate from the revenue manager, and I'm going to let the mayor speak to, because it was his decision to go in this direction. We presented him
I'm just trying to find the bottom line.
We presented him with all the options. As you know, there are a whole bunch of them that we can present when you're talking about revenue. And Mayor, I don't know if you want to walk through your thinking.
Sure, really, we'll go back, if you want to go back to the last budget, really, what I brought forward is the two tax revenue enhancements that I think that be palatable for the public and more palatable for the council. 0.25%, 25 cents on $100 being spent. I think that puts us in a better position. It's across the board with regards to restaurants, retailers, with regards to the digression of the revenues. That's like everything. I mean, really with the budget, it's this point in time, like Alderman Donlin brought up. If the legislature won't allow us to do it, then whatever that point in time is. Director McCarty had said, well, the shortfall is going to be $8.5 million, now it's $11.5 million. So it's just based on the information we have at this point in time. My personal opinion, I think with the bicentennial, I think we'll see a rebound, but that's my personal opinion. We'll find out at the end of next fiscal year. So really, it's whatever you're comfortable with, and and that's really what's hard is I came forward with the best budget I thought was most amenable for the public and for the aldermen that have that comfort level. But if not, I understand that. But we have to have viable solutions, because we can just tear it apart. But when you take something down on the revenue side, you either replace it with expenses or you spend down fund balance. And so what we're doing is propose the revenue enhancements, the cuts, slowing down spending, and then I think that puts us in the best position at this point in time next year, but time will tell.
Well, Mayor, I hope we all hope we have a rebound when bicentennial comes through. But my question was basically how are we
how good do we feel that that's going to be the right number based on we don't know what the market's with the e-sales? That's the problem, is we don't know if people are going to spend here in Springfield or they're going to go online, and that's the problem. And that's Alderman McMahon brought it up, and I thought, man, that's something we didn't think about.
I guess with Springfield, we, like any other community, no community felt the impact of not having a state budget for 2 years more than Springfield.
I know that.
So that is huge, that they finally got their act together and gave us a budget. But I'd ask Dallas Whitford, his feelings with regards to sales tax revenue versus another one and going that direction. He's been here the longest. With regards to revenues, he's handled it for 20-some years, I believe.
30.
30.
As far as
Holy
the
smokes.
4.3 number, that's a flat projection, which is the first time we've ever done a flat projection. It peaked at about a 4 point, in FY16, it was the peak for that revenue source at a 4% was $4.6 million. For years and years and years, our taxes took care of the growth in personal services. That's the first time we've had a flat revenue projection for sales tax.
One final question. Since what Alderman Donlin was covering was said that we're really looking at an extra 1.8 million on top of 11.5 million. So does that raise our deficit up to 13.3? Is that?
No.
No. It would just, if the 1.3 million, the deficit is what it is. The 11.4 didn't have any new revenue in there. So that was the starting point, and then you go backwards from there, and then you fill in the holes. Okay, so the mayor offered $3.7 million in cuts, and then he proposed $5.5 million in revenue, et cetera, and the plug at the end was fund balance. So it doesn't mean the deficit's any bigger. It just means that if there's another $1.8 million piece missing, then the mayor and the city council have to make a policy decision on how to close that gap. Is it going to be use of fund balance? Is it going to be more cuts? Or is it going to be more revenue?
There's still more money we have to come up with, no matter how we do it, right?
Unless you decide to use fund balance, yes, correct.
So it really is 13.3.
No. It starts at 11.4 and goes backwards from there. 11.4 is nothing happening. So you start there as your worst case scenario, and then you work backwards.
Alderman Tyler.
This is for the fleet manager. One of the things that has been brought up and
Well, there goes our budget.
Yep.
We're going to need a little more money in our budget.
Mike and Mike's hand.
See if it works.
Let me do it right.
Anyway, now that the excitement's over, what I'm looking at, and this is something that's come up every year, is because of the accounting decision that was made on how to allocate costs, what's happening is that a lot of people got sticker shock when it came to the cost of a repair because of, like you said, how much per hour these technicians were receiving. But I think one of the big sticker shocks that it keeps coming up over and over again and we keep looking at is the oil changes. So I guess my first question is do we have, are oil changes done during downtime of other repairs, or is it something that's constantly coming in?
The oil changes are all referred to as preventive maintenance, are normally scheduled in the evening shift, the night shift, and that way we can address those oil changes, get them in and get them out. When we do a preventive maintenance inspection, we look at the whole vehicle, not just an oil change. We could, theoretically, I don't want to incite any of our union employees, but we could theoretically outsource those.
And that's the two options I wanted to bring up, is that it's been brought up by some of the departments that don't have as big of budgets and end up having to come for corporate subsidy or have to be a little more lean and mean, have said that they could go over and for $20 to $30 get the oil changed, or they come over here and then they get billed $180 to $250 depending on who did it. And like I said, I understand the accounting practice and why we've done what we've done, but one of the questions that I've had has been, is it possible that as a senior technician retires, could we replace that with a very low-cost oil change technician position that would be something that'd be brought in with less experience? All they would do is oil changes. It would dramatically decrease the cost of that service and free up a more experienced technician to continue working on other projects.
Yes, I believe we've got a plan in place to address that with the fleet technician apprentice. We can bring someone, they can actually do the oil change. The senior technician will then, at that time, oversee what he's doing and then walk him through the inspection, the complete vehicle inspection, so they can identify any other issues with the particular vehicle that's in the shop. A lot of these vehicles we only see once or twice a year. So with the interval we have of 3,000 miles. So it's very important that we do a complete inspection each time, because they're getting driven and a lot of times not back in time before the PMs becomes overdue.
Sorry, I was going to say, that's the big difference between taking one of our vehicles to our fleet shop versus taking it to Jiffy Stop or whatever. They go in and they change the oil. At our shop, they do a full inspection of the vehicle. There's a huge checklist. They have to look at everything. And, you know, as old as our vehicles are, they often find something else that needs to be fixed as well. Also, I wanted to clarify, we don't bill for oil changes or anything else anymore. We haven't done that for over a year. We now just went to a flat rate model where we calculate charges and they just pay a monthly flat fee every year. We're not doing real-time billing anymore.
Okay. I guess that kind of probably answers my next question. I was a little bit concerned. My only other concern with the apprentice, because I like the idea, I think it will help reduce costs, but my only concern is that you'd be billing for the supervisor and the apprentice because he's having to overlook for that same hour, and then it would actually end up being a small increase in cost when doing cost allocation because you've got two sets of eyes on that.
Yes, but you also have two sets of hands, which means the job should get done twice as quick.
Very good. Thank you.
Alderman Turner?
Can you tell us where the RFP is in that process? Director McCarty said that he was going to defer to you.
Would you repeat the question, please?
The RFP?
Oh, RFP, yes. Actually, I got a written statement for that.
Oh, wow.
I'd like to read that for you.
I told him to come prepared.
Oh, wow.
I told him you would ask and to come prepared.
No wonder you dropped the mic.
I'm going to drop it now. We'd like to give you everyone a quick update as it pertains to the parts RFP. We've been working through the proposals very closely to encompass each vendor's full offer. Additionally, Matt Gennari has been phoning various references and submitted both by Mancon and O'Reilly's. The questions, he's still waiting for return phone calls on several of those references. If any questions or further questions are, we have completed the RFP evaluation basically on cost. And we see no advantage to make a change at this time. And the one real advantage that we have with our current vendor is real-time parts availability when on day shift and on night shift. So we hope to have that completed this week to Director McCarty, and then he'll present it to the council. Does that answer your question?
It does, but I have another question. And
Okay.
this may be just because of my lack of knowledge on automotive stuff and parts and all of that. So when you say you have real-time availability on the day and night shift, but you would not have that with the other proposed vendors, is that because they did not include that in their proposals, or was it because it was not something that was identified in the RFP, or?
I would have to say because they, for instance, one vendor would not have any. We have with Napa, we have what they call a operational store warehouse, and their employees actually are working in the parts room dispensing parts. So when they see that they need parts, they can go, this is, I'm speaking as a night shift, they can go back to the store, pull parts, and then bring them back for our technicians who need them for that shift, instead of waiting till the next day. O'Reilly's could possibly do that. They didn't propose it. Mancon would not be able to do that at all because they have no parts warehouse anywhere close to Springfield. Actually, the next closest facility would be Great Lakes Naval Training Station in Chicago.
Okay.
Chair?
Yes, sir, Alderman Hanover.
Real quick, how do we, like an oil change, what's it cost for us to do there? How do we evaluate what, if we're getting if we're getting a good value? I mean, I understand the cost of the garage going down. Okay, I can appreciate that. But how do we evaluate to decide whether something would be cheaper to go outside the garage and pay for, or oil changes or tire rotation? I don't know. I'm not a mechanic, but I'll use oil changes, for example. I know at the state level, we had contracts because, quite frankly, they could not do it less expensive than what we could go out and get it for. And I think we had a contract or something. What's our cost to do that? Do we know, or do we track it, or?
Well, we're always looking at opportunities to try and save money, but there's a real problem. And the real problem is that our collective bargaining contracts forbid it. The contracts that we inherited the ultimate contract that we inherited that's being utilized is the CWLP utility contract that was in place at the time, because when we consolidated, we had 4 or 5 different unions, and we consolidated them all into one, and they chose to go with the machinist union, which is where they had the most members from the utility. That's the contract that was our starting point. That contract has had and continues to have a clause in there that bars us from outsourcing work that the union has traditionally done. So even if we wanted to outsource the oil changes, we couldn't under the collective bargaining contract that we have.
Okay, thank you.
But we did do that evaluation in the beginning on body shop, and we worked that into the negotiations up front. But right now, we've had, quite honestly, a lot of issues with some departments doing a little bit of the outsourcing, and there's been several grievances on it.
Director, just a second. Alderman Romano, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bill, as far as the range of solutions that we have, and as a couple of aldermen have pointed out tonight, the sales tax won't generate what we thought it would because we're not going to have a 12-month revenue stream from the sales tax. But as far as keeping as much on the table as we can for solving our budget problem, Mayor, last year you introduced the natural gas tax idea, and you've already given an answer as to why you didn't present that again this year. But just for the purposes of all of us being aware of what kind of revenue that tax would create, and I know Director Brown is here still from CWLP, so I'd ask Mayor from your office and from CWLP to take out or find all the previous estimates that we had made for the natural gas tax and see what kind of revenue projection it creates. One of the advantages to the natural gas tax is that, we've got all this non-taxable real estate property out in our community. We've got all the state of Illinois properties. We've got the 2 major tax-exempt hospitals. We've got UIS, no real estate taxes. But the beauty of, well, I shouldn't say it that way, the natural gas utility tax allows everyone to contribute to the financial support of the city, including those that to some extent escape it now. So I think it's an option we have to look at again and keep it on the table for our options.
1.4 million, to answer your question.
Yeah, I'd like CWLP to take a look at their prior work on that. I think Eric Hobby ran some numbers when he was the manager, and Let's
We
just
ran
make
them
sure we
last year.
got something that's a good number to work with.
Where was that gas tax proposed to go, where was the revenue proposed to go to?
Last year, if I recall correctly, half of it was going to go towards pensions and half towards equipment.
Director, just an overall general question, and as I should have got Director Couzin, but in eliminating position, if there's someone in that position, what's the process?
For,
Director Couzin was talking about eliminating a position.
yes,
If
he has a
position-
position that's proposed to be eliminated.
Okay, if that
Correct.
position is eliminated, and if there's someone in that position, what would be the process for that?
We would lay them off unless they're collective bargaining, then you would have the whole bumping process. His particular position is not a union position.
Is it a position that's pertinent to the operational standards of the city?
In his estimation, it is one that we can live without. Otherwise, I don't think he would have made this.
Okay, and then I noticed going through it, and I looked at CWLP's budget, and they did a projection on revenues on what the amount was budgeted, and a lot of these are projections on amount that was actually spent. How do we compare the differences there? Sorry, Doug, just using you as a tool. CWLP's budget was proposed on the amount that was budgeted in fiscal year 2018, and then, for instance, Convention and Visitors Bureau budget was proposed on amount that was actually spent in 2018. So how do you compare the difference in those two when they're used by two different factors? One is used on a budgeted amount, and one is used on an actual money spent amount.
Well, we look at all of that. I mean, we look at what's been budgeted before, we look at what we've spent. Usually, most of our budgets are based upon, from an expense side, our actual expenses and our trends over the last several years. Now, of course, we interject with anything that we know is going to happen, like we're going to buy a piece of equipment or something like that, we'll add that in there. But our base budgeting practice is to begin with what we've spent in the past, especially for things like utilities and
Okay.
ongoing costs annually.
So if CWLP's budget was presented to us on the fiscal year 18 budgeted amount and not the actual amount spent, how do we compare that when they didn't use it on the actual amount spent?
Yeah, I honestly, I'm not following you.
Okay, when CWLP, in this budget book that they gave us, there's a budgeted amount and then there's an actual amount spent. So when CWLP gave us their budget, it was on the budgeted amount for fiscal year 18. When the Convention and Visitor Bureau gave us their budget, it was on the actual amount of money spent. So instead of them doing it on the budgeted amount for 2018,
Yeah, your book should have both.
okay, but.
Yeah, you
but-
should have the budget
but it
and
was-
the estimated expenditure.
I know
amount.
that, it does have both, but they gave it to us two different forms, that's what I'm saying. So how do we compare that? When one's giving it to us on a budgeted amount and one's giving it to us on an actual amount spent?
I think on the Convention Visitors Bureau, it's with the state grant, I think that comes into play because they're on a different fiscal cycle.
I understand that, but, okay, I use police and fire. They gave us on the actual amount spent, where CWLP gave it to us on the amount that was budgeted for fiscal year 18. So we're not comparing apples to apples. We're comparing apples to oranges. If one's giving it to us on a budgeted amount and one's giving it to an actual expense amount.
I'm either going to answer your question or confuse everybody. In the budget book, what's called the white sheets, the 3F report, you have FY17 actual. Those are audited numbers. Then you have FY18 budget, which is current up through the time that I take that extract about November 1st. And then you have estimated year end from the departments based on their experience. And then you have FY19, what we're asking for.
Correct.
Now, there are 4,000 budget lines, and each of them tells a different story. Believe it or not, personal service lines are the easiest ones to forecast because we keep a biweekly payroll report. But all of you that have ever been involved in budgeting and maybe your state government careers, you know that you have an equipment line that's a one-time expense. You have a gasoline line that we actually trend out 5 years. We have a commodity like salt that we trend out 5 years, and then you have the benefit of whatever the state contract amount is. So what we're doing for what I can say 12 of the city's 13 agencies is we're looking at a variety of factors for each line. And believe me, 17, 18 budget, 18 year-to-date, 18 estimated actual, all go into the play. and several years before then for what we're estimating for 19. I hope that helps a little bit.
Right.
I will have to ask you personally because I don't think you understand what I'm
Okay,
asking.
all right.
Yeah, and we don't prepare the utilities budget, so that could be part of the issue too, with just their process versus ours. But what Julie just explained is our process for the 12
I understand our
departments.
process, but I just wanted to know the reason. But are there any other questions? No other questions? We thank everybody that has
Thank you.
presented their budgets. Mayor, I just want to make a statement. We're trying to hit a home run in solving this budget, and you know, I think we had to have some contingency plans in place if we can't get to where you want to be with the numbers, and we have to. I think we're going to have to step this thing down and looking at the whole thing honestly, so that the citizens will have a realistic view of what we're doing. Because if we come back and it's not solved, I mean, it's not complete when you want it by February 20th, there has to be a contingency plan in place, and I think we need to look at that also in the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, it has to be completed by March 1st. I mean, that's the end of the fiscal year, but two things. One is, after this, I'll take a look at my schedule and ask Alderman to come in 2 at a time, and we can go over any unanswered questions or ideas you might have. And then the other thing I want to thank everybody for coming. I mean, I think this is the first time all the aldermen have participated in all the budget hearings, so we really appreciate that.
You stole my thunder. I'll accept a motion for adjournment.
Mr. Chairman.
You're adjourned.